13 enemy fighters locked onto one American plane. Command ordered him to run. He turned toward them instead. At 27,000 feet above the Pacific, the sky looked calm. Too calm. The sun reflected off endless clouds like a mirror hiding secrets beneath it. For Second Lieutenant Thomas "Tom" Keller, this was supposed to be a routine escort mission. His P-51 Mustang cut through the air with the quiet confidence of American air power. He was a rookie, fresh, barely weeks into combat duty. The kind of pilot Command hoped would learn today, not make history. Then the radio crackled. Bandits. Multiple contacts, 13, closing fast. Tom's heart slammed against his ribs. 13 Japanese fighters, Zeros and Ki-43, Oscars, were streaking toward him like a swarm of hornets. His wingmen were miles away, tangled in cloud cover. No backup, no escape, just one Mustang, and 13 enemies. Command expected him to disengage, run, survive. What they didn't expect was what he did next. Thomas Keller had grown up in a quiet, Midwestern town where the loudest sound was usually the wind through cornfields. He wasn't born a warrior. He wasn't reckless or arrogant. He was methodical, calm, and, according to his instructors, too careful. In training, he followed every rule, every checklist, every formation pattern. Some veterans whispered that pilots like Keller didn't last long in real combat. But the war didn't care about opinions. By early 1945, the Pacific War had entered its most brutal phase. American bombers were pushing closer to Japan, and the skies had become a killing ground. The Japanese air forces, though battered, were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. Rookie pilots were thrown into missions once reserved for seasoned aces. Keller's P-51, tail number barely scratched by combat, was assigned escort duty for B-29 bombers heading toward an industrial target. His job was simple: protect the bombers, stay in formation, don't chase kills. Then the formation broke. Weather scattered the bombers. Radios filled with overlapping voices. And suddenly Keller found himself isolated, flying alone above a sea of clouds. That's when radar control called out the contacts. 13 enemy aircraft. Not a mistake. Not a glitch. 13. These weren't amateurs. The Japanese pilots used altitude and sun positioning with deadly precision. They came from above and behind, classic hunter tactics. Any veteran would have rolled into a dive and run. Keller didn't. Inside his cockpit, oxygen mask tight against his face, Keller forced his breathing to slow. He remembered his instructor's words. A Mustang isn't just fast, it's smart. Use it like a chessboard, not a fist. He checked fuel, ammo, engine temperature. Then he turned toward the enemy. The first Zero screamed past him, firing wildly. Keller rolled inverted and dropped, pulling the Mustang into a tight spiral that exploited the P-51's superior speed. The Japanese pilots expected fear. What they got was aggression. Within seconds, the sky exploded into chaos. The Japanese formation split, encircling Keller like wolves around wounded prey. Tracer rounds stitched the air around his canopy. Metal screamed as bullets tore through empty space inches from his head. Keller felt the shock waves, smelled cordite, tasted fear. But fear sharpened him. He climbed sharply, forcing the attackers to burn fuel and lose speed. A rookie mistake? No, a calculated trap. 2 Zeros stalled for a fraction of a second, long enough. Keller rolled, lined up his gun sight, and fired. The Mustang's 650 caliber machine guns roared like thunder. 1 Zero burst into flames, spiraling downward in a trail of black smoke. Keller didn't watch it fall. He was already moving. Another enemy dove at him head-on. Keller held his fire until the last possible moment. When he pulled the trigger, the Japanese plane disintegrated mid-air. Pieces scattered across the sky like confetti. 13 became 11. The radio exploded with stunned voices. Control, this is Red 2. Keller is engaging all contacts alone. Command couldn't believe it. A rookie was fighting 13 enemy aircraft, and winning. The Japanese pilots changed tactics. They began coordinated dives, trying to overwhelm him with sheer volume of fire. Keller's canopy cracked. Warning lights flashed. His left wing took damage. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead into his eyes. Still he fought. He used cloud cover like a magician's cloak, disappearing and reappearing at impossible angles. Every maneuver was textbook, executed with instinct that couldn't be taught. One by one the attackers fell, but ammo ran low. Fuel dropped dangerously, and the last 5 pilots knew it. With 5 enemies remaining, Keller had a choice. Run! Or finish it. Command ordered him to disengage immediately. Their voices were sharp, panicked. "Keller, break off! That's an order!" Keller looked at his fuel gauge, looked at the smoke trails below, looked at the bombers, now vulnerable without escort. He replied calmly, "Negative. I can hold them." Those words froze the control room. The final engagement was brutal. Keller flew defensively now, conserving ammo, forcing enemies into bad angles. One Japanese pilot tried a suicide ram. Keller rolled at the last second. The enemy missed and vanished into the clouds below. Another Zero caught fire after a short burst. The pilot bailed out. 3 left. By now, Keller's Mustang was scarred, leaking oil, vibrating violently. Any second, the engine could fail. Then American reinforcements appeared on the horizon. The remaining Japanese fighters broke and fled. The sky went quiet. Keller exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. When Keller landed, ground crews stared in disbelief. His aircraft looked like it had flown through a storm of steel. Command officers rushed toward him, expecting shock. Trauma. Collapse. Instead, Keller climbed out, removed his helmet, and simply said, "Request debrief, sir." Official records credited him with 7 confirmed kills and multiple damaged aircraft. Unofficially, veterans said he had broken the back of that Japanese squadron alone. Command changed their training manuals after that day. Keller was no longer the rookie. He became proof that courage, discipline, and calm under fire could rewrite fate, even when the odds were 13-1. And somewhere over the Pacific, the sky remembered his name. The briefing room was unusually quiet. No laughter, no side conversations. Even the veteran pilots, men who had flown dozens of missions, sat straight-backed, eyes fixed on the young lieutenant standing near the projector screen. Thomas Keller still smelled of oil and smoke. A thin bandage crossed his forehead, hastily applied by medics who kept shaking their heads in disbelief. His flight suit was torn at the sleeve, stained dark where hydraulic fluid had soaked through, yet his expression was calm, almost distant, as if the sky had not tried to kill him just hours earlier. The commanding officer entered and shut the door himself. That alone told everyone this was no ordinary debrief. "Keller," the colonel said slowly, "walk us through exactly what happened." The projector clicked on. A frozen frame of radar data appeared. 13. Red blips converging on a single blue one. Keller spoke quietly, without drama. He described altitude choices, energy management, angles of attack. He explained how he counted ammunition bursts, how he used cloud layers not to hide but to reposition. Every sentence stripped away the myth of luck and replaced it with cold, deliberate skill. As the story unfolded, the room changed. What began as disbelief turned into something heavier, respect mixed with unease. Because if a rookie could do this, what else was possible? What else had they misunderstood about air combat? One intelligence officer interrupted. "Lieutenant, why didn't you disengage when ordered?" The room froze. Keller paused. He didn't look defiant. He didn't look proud. "Sir," he said, "if I ran, they would have gone straight for the bombers. I still had altitude. I still had speed. So I stayed. No excuses. No hero speech. Just logic." When the debrief ended, the colonel dismissed everyone except Keller. Those outside heard raised voices, then silence. When Keller finally stepped out, the colonel followed him and addressed the pilots waiting in the corridor. "Gentlemen," he said, "you just witnessed the standard change." From that moment on, Keller was no longer treated as a junior officer. He was requested for mission planning, asked for input, studied, and far away, on Japanese airfields, pilots spoke in low voices about an American Mustang that refused to run, no matter the odds across the Pacific. In makeshift briefing huts and hardened bunkers, Japanese intelligence officers examined wreckage reports with growing concern. 13 aircraft launched, fewer than half returned. Survivors told fragmented stories, confusing, emotional, almost unbelievable. "The Mustang didn't flee," one pilot said, hands shaking. "He turned into us. He climbed when he should have died." At first, commanders dismissed it as exaggeration. But then patterns emerged. Multiple engagements, similar tactics, same ruthless efficiency. One American pilot seemed to appear wherever formations broke apart, exploiting chaos with surgical precision. They gave him a name, not his real one, but a battlefield title whispered with a mix of fear and anger. "The White Fang." Because his Mustang struck once, hard, and vanished. For Keller, the attention came with a cost. His missions grew more dangerous. He was assigned to escort routes known for ambushes, bait missions, interceptions where retreat was impossible. Each time, Command watched closely, half expecting the rookie's luck to finally run out. But it didn't. Keller adapted faster than his enemies. When the Japanese switched to vertical attacks, he countered with rolling scissors. When they attempted mass dives, he broke formations apart before they could synchronize. He fought not like a lone hero, but like a strategist dismantling a system. Yet the war was changing. By late 1945, desperation crept into the skies. Kamikaze tactics increased. Pilots flew with nothing to lose. Keller encountered them more often, men who didn't care if they lived, only that he died. One mission nearly ended everything. During a high-altitude intercept, a Japanese fighter deliberately rammed Keller's Mustang. The collision sheared off part of his right wing. The aircraft spiraled violently. Alarm screamed. The Pacific waited below like an open grave. Keller fought the controls with everything he had. Barely, he recovered. When he landed, mechanics said the Mustang should not have survived. Command grounded him for 48 hours. Keller spent that time staring at the sky. Not afraid, just thoughtful. The war ended not with a final dogfight, but with silence. Orders came down. Missions canceled. Pilots stood on runways unsure what to do with hands that had lived on. Throttles and triggers for years. Thomas Keller flew one last patrol after the ceasefire. No enemies, no radio chatter, just clouds drifting endlessly beneath his wings. For the first time since becoming the White Fang, he felt the weight of everything he had survived. Back home, newspapers printed sanitized versions of the story. Rookie pilot downs. 7 in single engagement. Photos showed a smiling young officer, clean, composed, heroic. They didn't show the cracked canopy. They didn't show the blood in his eyes. They didn't show the moment he chose not to run. Keller never chased fame. After the war, he trained pilots, wrote manuals, quietly reshaped how air combat was taught. His influence lived not in medals, but in lives saved by smarter tactics. Years later, a new generation of pilots studied a case file labeled simply 13 versus 1 Pacific Theater. Instructors paused before closing it. Remember this, they said. Skill beats numbers, calm beats chaos, and sometimes one pilot is enough. High above the Pacific, where contrails fade and history lingers, the sky still carries the echo of a single Mustang turning toward 13 enemies and refusing to blink time. Did what war never could. It slowed everything down. Years passed. Airfields turned into museums, runways cracked with weeds. The roar of engines that once shook the Pacific skies faded into memory. But for Thomas Keller, the war never truly ended. It simply changed its shape. In civilian clothes, without the flight suit and insignia, Keller looked ordinary. Too ordinary, some thought, for a man whose name had once caused enemy pilots to hesitate before engaging. He avoided interviews, declined ceremonies. When asked about the day he faced 13 enemy aircraft alone, he would shrug and redirect the conversation. Others did more, he'd say. They just didn't survive to talk about it. But the war had marked him in ways medals could not. At night, Keller dreamed of altitude, of thin air and frozen breath inside an oxygen mask. He dreamed of tracer fire arcing past his canopy, of engines coughing mid-climb, of moments where time stretched so thin it felt like it might snap. He woke before dawn, heart racing, hands gripping invisible controls. Yet he never regretted the choice he made that day, not once. He returned to bases as an instructor, where young pilots, some barely older than he had, been listened in absolute silence when he spoke. Keller didn't glorify combat. He didn't tell them how it felt to kill. He taught them how to think, how to slow their breathing, how to respect the machine without trusting it blindly, how fear could either collapse the mind or sharpen it into something precise. One cadet once asked him, "Sir, were you scared when they outnumbered you?" Keller paused longer than usual. "Yes," he said, "but fear doesn't decide outcomes. Decisions do." That answer followed those pilots into future wars, future skies, future moments when running felt easier than standing ground. Privately, Keller kept a single photograph on his desk, a faded image of a P-51 Mustang parked on a Pacific airstrip, bullet holes patched crudely along the fuselage, a machine held together by rivets, oil, and stubborn refusal. On the back, written in pencil, were just 4 words. Still had altitude. For Keller, that phrase wasn't tactical. It was philosophical. As long as you had altitude, time, awareness, control, you weren't beaten. Not yet. Decades later, long after Thomas Keller had faded from public memory, historians reopened Pacific War archives. Declassified combat logs, radar transcripts, enemy loss reports once locked away. Analysts cross-referenced timelines, locations, and pilot accounts. What they found stunned them. The engagement, once credited with 7 kills, was likely far more devastating. Japanese records revealed emergency landings, mid-air collisions caused by panic, and aircraft written off after returning damaged beyond repair. The real number of planes Keller removed from combat that day may have been 10 or more, but numbers were never the point. Military academies began using the engagement, not as a story of heroism, but as a case study in asymmetric survival. 1 pilot, inferior numbers, no retreat, and yet complete tactical dominance. Simulators recreated the fight. Again and again, modern pilots failed where Keller succeeded. They burned fuel too fast. They fixated on targets. They panicked under pressure. Only a handful managed to replicate the flow, energy control, discipline, restraint. Instructors ended simulations the same way every time. This wasn't luck, they said. This was mastery under fear in Japan. The story resurfaced differently. Former pilots, now elderly men, spoke openly for the first time. One survivor of the engagement admitted something historians had long suspected. "We believed we had him," he said. "But when he turned toward us, something changed. We weren't hunting anymore. We were reacting." That reaction, hesitation, confusion, loss of coordination, was Keller's true victory. Not the kills, not the headlines, but the moment 13 trained pilots lost unity and became 13 individuals. History finally gave the engagement a formal title. The one-man interdiction. Yet Keller never knew. He passed quietly, long before documentaries and reenactments revived the story. No fighter escort, no flyover, just a folded flag and a small service attended by family, students, and a few aging pilots who understood what the sky had demanded of him. Today, high above the Pacific, modern jets streak past at supersonic speed. Technology has changed. Wars have changed. But in flight schools, in briefing rooms, and in the quiet moment before takeoff, instructors still tell one story. About a rookie, about 13 enemies, about a decision to turn, not flee, and they end it the same way. Remember, they say, when the sky closes in, altitude is more than height. It is choice. Long after the war had been reduced to footnotes and faded photographs, one moment refused to disappear. It lived not in museums or medal cases, but in the quiet space between decision and action, the split. Second, where instinct either folds or hardens into resolve. For Thomas Keller, that moment came high above the Pacific, when 13 enemy aircraft closed in and every rational voice said, "Run." History would later record what happened next in technical terms: altitude advantage, energy retention, enemy disorganization. But none of those words fully captured the truth. The truth was simpler and far more human. Keller turned because retreat would have meant surrendering control, and control was the one thing war never returned once lost. In later years, psychologists studying combat stress found something unusual when reviewing Keller's reports. There was no evidence of tunnel vision, no signs of panic-induced fixation. Instead, his language showed expanded awareness. Time slowed, spatial reasoning sharpened, and emotional response narrowed into focus rather than fear. They concluded that Keller did not suppress fear. He reorganized around it. That distinction mattered. It explained why his actions felt almost impossible to replicate. You could train maneuvers, simulate engagements, memorize tactics, but you could not easily teach a mind to remain open when chaos demanded collapse. This is why Keller's engagement endured where thousands of others faded. It was not the number of aircraft he faced, nor the kills attributed to him, nor even the audacity of a rookie defying orders in the heat of battle. It was the turn, the refusal to let momentum belong to the enemy. In air combat doctrine, instructors would later call this initiative dominance, but pilots knew it by a simpler name: owning the fight. Keller owned it not because he was fearless, but because he understood something essential, that once you yield initiative, you begin reacting, and reaction is where defeat grows. The Pacific sky that day bore silent witness to that lesson. Clouds drifted indifferently. The ocean waited below with infinite patience. None of it cared who lived or died. And yet within that indifferent space, a single human decision reshaped outcomes far beyond its moment. Bombers completed their run. Crews made it home. Enemy formations began flying differently, more cautiously, more fragmented. The ripple spread outward, unseen but undeniable. In retirement lectures long after his name had slipped from headlines, Keller was once asked what he believed his legacy to be. He looked genuinely surprised by the question. After a long pause, he answered softly, almost to himself. "I think," he said, "it's that people realized you don't need permission to act correctly." That sentence never appeared in official transcripts. It circulated instead through memory, passed from pilot to pilot, instructor to student. It became a quiet counterweight to rigid doctrine, a reminder that rules guide, but judgment decides. Today, when historians summarize the encounter, they often close with a familiar phrase, 13 against 1. It sounds dramatic, cinematic, almost mythic. But those who understand combat know the real imbalance wasn't numerical. It was psychological. 13 pilots expected obedience from fear. One pilot expected clarity from it, and clarity won. Somewhere, perhaps only in imagination now, a P-51 Mustang still cuts through cold blue air. No radio chatter, no warning lights. Just the hum of an engine, and the steady hand of a pilot who knows that the most important maneuver is not found in manuals or diagrams. It is the turn you choose to make when the sky closes in and everything tells you not to. That turn never faded. 13 pilots believed numbers would decide the sky. One rookie believed control would. He didn't survive because he was lucky. He survived because he refused to give the fight away. And in doing so, he taught the world a lesson the sky never forgot.